Hey everyone, welcome. My name is Marty Dagoberto. I'm on staff with NOFA Mass here for our 36th annual NOFA Winter Conference. I'm glad you all are here. Welcome, welcome. Before we get going, si hay personas que necesitan interpretación? Aquí? Anyone need translation here? Okay, then we're good. And folks online will be able to get the translation. So you are here for understanding solidarity, economy, and reparations from easy for me to say, transatlantic slave trade with Saskia VannJames, who is the co-founder and director of Racial Justice and Health Equity Policy, and with MRCC, the Massachusetts Recreational Consumer Council. Before we fully introduce her and kick it over, we do have our introductory slides here, which you may have seen in the previous session. We just want to get through it here. First off, we are here presenting on native land, land that was inhabited by the Nipmuc people prior to European colonization. So as we work to heal the destruction caused by colonization, we appreciate your support, your solidarity, and continued learning. And if you don't know the names of the people from the land where you currently live, please do check out native-land.ca, that website there. I'll put it in the chat as well to learn about where you live. At NOFA Mass, we are doing our best to center racial equity in the food system in all that we do. We recognize that our agricultural system is built on stolen land with stolen labor. And so our conference aims to help address this harm and bring equity to the food system. We do have BIPOC and White Ally caucuses happening today at 1. BIPOC caucus is in Sheehan Hall, and the White Ally caucus is in the dining room there. On the right-hand side, you'll see a bunch of organizations, which let me get that out of the way there for you. Sorry about that. Organizations that we want to hold up that are doing on-the-ground solutions to address racial equity in the food system. So please do check them out. Here are some of our sponsors for the conference that make this conference possible. We're very grateful to all these organizations and businesses who support us financially. Please do remember we have an ongoing auction. If you go to through the Whova app, you should be able to find it, but we'll post a link in the chat as well. A bunch of great items there. I'm going to have to go in and rebid. I already got outbid on a couple things, but that's a really great fundraiser there to get some really cool stuff. And finally, before we get going, I want to remind you that there is a survey that helps us to improve this conference. Like I said, we've been going for 36 years and it can always get better. And we appreciate your feedback on that survey link that will be sent out to all registrants. And with that, I'll let you pull up your presentation and share the screen. All right, Saskia.
All right, hey you guys. Glad to see you guys here. So I'm trying to, there's a lot of information I have to present today, and thank you to everybody who's with me virtually as well too. There's a lot of information that I'm going to present today. I'm going to try to move as speedily as possible so that way we can get into our imagination exercise and really have time for that today. I acknowledge all my neurodivergent people. I apologize for not being multilingual and not knowing sign language as well too. So this could have been even more encompassing for all of us. But I really would like for this not to be like lecture based and for this to be as interactive as possible. And during our imagination exercises, for us to also have Q&A time. So for those of us who are here virtually with me, please put in your questions as you go along. And I will have somebody answer the questions once we get to our imagination exercises and Q&A. So today's session is on building solidarity economy with reparations from the transatlantic slave trade. I am the director of Reparatory Justice, Racial Justice, and Health Equity at MRCC, Massachusetts Recreational Consumer Council. I am also the co-founder of Grow to Consume, which is a reparatory justice-based program here in Massachusetts. So just want to do that. So one of the first things that we need to acknowledge is that, let me just move this off my screen down. Okay. One of the first things we need to acknowledge is barriers facing solidarity economy, and how reparations from the transatlantic slave trade can repair. A lot of the text on here on these slides is text heavy. It's intentional. You have cards. If you are here virtually, there is something with QR codes. I want you to be able to go back and have access to all this information because it's a lot to digest all at once. So I'm just going to go through highlights. You can read through, visually, audibly, everybody learns differently. So I just wanted to be able to have all this information here for you guys today. So we have three different areas that I believe are the biggest barriers to achieving solidarity economy. One is that we have a segregated approach to our problems within this country. Segregation is not just by people, it's also by areas. Colonization approaches everything in a segregated format. So when we look at justice, we look at land over here, we look at climate over here, we do environment over here, we have health over here, we have housing over here, and yet all of these things are intersectional. So when we talk about reparative justice, for me, reparative justice is one that requires two elements. One is that it requires a systems alignment approach. Right? So when you're talking about reparative justice, you need to acknowledge that this issue actually 9 times out of 10 is in multiple areas that through traditional colonization of justice fits into multiple buckets. And then the second area for reparative justice is that it has to be there has to be a people participatory process within reparatory justice. It has to be led by the people who have been harmed. They have to name their harm, and they have to name what it's going to take to repair the harm. We'll get into that in a second. The second area that I believe is a huge issue here is with solidarity economy is land ownership and sovereignty. So here in Massachusetts, 96% of farmland is white owned. Our Native Americans have their land back movement. We need to see this moving stronger. Less than 2% of farmland is BIPOC owned. And there is a wealth gap within the greater Boston area. We have this data now of $8 per African American to $247K per white resident. And then home ownership is around 20 to 30% around the greater Boston area for African American households. So when you're talking about loans, leveraging property to access to get farmland, this is really a huge feat. And where people have to inherit wealth somehow, and we know how that somehow occurs through capitalism. And so there's multiple barriers. In addition, land ownership is one through our banking system, where if you are a Black, Brown, Indigenous, a person of color, you note that on your banking forms, you face discrimination. It harms you, and white people, it harms you as well too. Systemic racism harms you as well too. So you're welcoming your neighbors, you're welcoming your Black people, your Hispanic people, your people of African descent, your Native Americans, your Asians, and your property value is going to go down. The banks are systemically having us fight against each other while the 1% is getting wealthier. So there's a cost for being anti-racist. This is intentional. They want to keep us divided. And then sovereignty. There has been multiple points throughout time in the whole United States where people of African descent and Native Americans have been fighting for land. Sovereignty is only recognized through our Native Americans. American freedmen, which we'll go into now, is not recognized as our tribe, and we'll go into that in a moment. And so multiple times throughout history, African Americans, American freedmen have owned land, have had, Black Wall Streets, and they have been not only. Okay, thank you. I have a tendency to get excited and I speak fast. So I will slow down on this information. I apologize. And if you need me to go slower, because I get excited, just do a Baptist finger or raise your hand for me and I will go even slower, okay? And so with the building up of land, you have 1% interest, corporate interest in our government, and white supremacy that targets and systemically builds down. And so we'll get more into that better. So there's no safety in just land ownership for people of African descent. We have to, in our Hispanic community, we actually have to approach this, I believe, in a different manner. And then the third area is land trauma and government interference. So I've gone into a little bit on the government interference. That's a whole lecture in and of itself. I don't really have time for that today. And land trauma, we have to acknowledge that there are people of African descent, of indigenous descent here, who have been worked as mules on the land, and how this is caused land trauma. So many African Americans actually look at growing as being put back in the fields to work. We are spoken to by white people as your place is in the field. This language still exists today. I'm still spoken to in this manner. When I speak with a lot of white growers across Massachusetts, they approach me as a potential worker. And that's the only way that they see me. So it's very, very problematic, and we can't even get, when that sort of ideology exists, we really can't get to the root of having African Americans, people of African descent, interested in working the land, because we're not recognizing that there's land trauma. So with that, we have Grow to Consume, which is a response to help address the land trauma that we have within our community. All right, so the history of Black Americans. Out of a tribe of many, we became one. So there's a lot of information here on the US Census Bureau and historically how it has categorized us. This is critical for you guys to understand how African Americans, American freedmen are now defined today. A lot of this language is lost. Today, we just say Black people. It's a slogan, you know, Black Lives Matter is a slogan to help combat against white supremacy, yet we are not just our skin color. We are whole people with heritage. We are whole people with ancestors. We deserve to be able to honor our ancestors and to honor the land that we walk upon. We deserve to be acknowledged more than just our skin color. For my white communities, the same is for you. You deserve to be recognized beyond than just a white person. Are you Irish? Within Irish, are there tribes? What is your tribes that you recognize yourself as? And so there is a decolonization that needs to occur beyond than just nationalities and recognizing yourself as a nationality, but actually what tribe do you identify with? And as part of your lineage, and how can we acknowledge one another? So in the United States, this was not happening whatsoever, as you can see here with our census. When the census began in 1970, the racial categories were free white persons, and then other free persons by color, and then slaves. There wasn't even a standard terminology. And that didn't occur until the 1800s. And so that expanded. And there was then Black, white, mulatto. In 1850, they added color. In 1870, we had Chinese, Indian. There was not Native American then yet, or Indian American yet. And so that was added in. Japanese was added in 1990, and then we had quadroon and octoroon were added. And then in the 1970s, there were no specific categories in the consensus listing form, but instructions were listed, you know, again, for white, B for Black, or Negro. Negro was introduced in the 1900s. Chinese, Japanese, Indian. These were a lot of the terms used in the 1900s going forward. And so within the census, there still wasn't recognition up until the 2000s of African American / Black. Even when we are doing our census bureaus and we're, responding to our government, within Black, we are not recognizing that Black is not a monolith. The US government does not recognize that Black is not a monolith. This is extremely problematic. It is extremely problematic for my African immigrants. It is extremely problematic for my Caribbean immigrants. It is extremely problematic for our African American freemen. Here. So they're just lumping us all together, and the system is continuously upholding harms and has systemic racism embedded. And so legally speaking, African Americans, that terminology is recognized, but it includes everybody who is Black. African Americans also identify as American freedmen, and American freedmen is the legal terminology for us. We are recognized, well, we were recognized as a tribe as part of the Civil War. And you have the Freedmen's Bureau. You have the Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands that happened in 1865. And so that was responsible for the supervision and management of all matters related to the refugees and freedmen and lands abandoned or seized during the Civil War. And so there is a huge, long-standing history between African Americans, American freedmen, and Native Americans. And a lot of people don't know this. They just say, oh, African people were brought over as slaves. That's the end of the narrative. You don't know that when Africans were brought over as slaves, that they were also, well, first of all, they were brought over as slaves. Also, there were Black indigenous people already here. African people travel. We've been all across the world. We've always been all across the world. So way before the United States decided to say, we here, this is ours, we were already here, and we identified as Black indigenous people here on Turtle Island. We were not formally a part of Native American tribes, but we were recognized as indigenous to ourselves. And then things began to really, through colonization, take a turn for the worse. We have tribes, Native American tribes, that actually enslaved American freedmen. And then with the Census Bureau, and those tribes, just for people who are listening audio-wise, we have the Cherokee, the Choctaw, and Creek Nations were among those Native American tribes that held enslaved Black Africans before and during the American Civil War. They actually supported the Confederacy during the war, supplying some warriors, and they were promised their own state if the Confederacy won. So Native American tribes, within their own tribes, they have anti-Blackness. And so Black indigenous people became Black, just Negroes. So there was a loss of Black indigenous Native people here on the land being recognized, and they became whitewashed as Negro and then just descendants of chattel slavery. So out of a tribe of many, we became one. And so this is part of the history of American freedmen. And if you would like, you can, read these documents and go into further detail. Again, I put this on here so that you guys actually have more context and details. And there's links for resources on here if you want to cite my sources. I share all of that. And so during the Civil War, there was a promise made for 40 acres. This promise was given from our government by General William T. Sherman, Special Field Order number 15. So this was phenomenal, historical, and totally would have changed what the United States looks like today if actually it had gone through. So in order to win the Civil War, Sherman met with like 20 other people, a lot of Baptist, I believe Methodist churches, church leaders came together, and they said, what do we need to do to win this war? And what do you guys want if we do win this war? And the American freedmen said, we want our own land and we want sovereignty. And so there was 3 different sections that came out of this order. The first one was that the islands from Charleston south, the abandoned rice fields along the rivers for 30 miles back from the sea, and the country bordering the St. Johns River, Florida, are reserved and set apart for the settlement of the Negroes, now made free by the acts of war and the proclamation of the President of the United States. So that's pretty phenomenal, right? Like all the islands around Florida, looking at Miami, all of this would have been freedmen land. And so in section 2, it specifies that these new communities, moreover, would be governed entirely by Black people themselves. On the islands and in the settlements hereafter to be established, no white person whatsoever, unless military officials and soldiers detailed for duty, will be permitted to reside, and the sole and exclusive management of affairs will be left to the freed people themselves. By the laws of war and orders of the President of the United States, the Negro is free and must be dealt with as such. And then finally, section 3 specifies the allocation of land. Each family shall have a plot of not more than 40 acres of tillable ground. And when it borders on some water channel with not more than 800 feet of waterfront, in possession of which land the military authorities will afford them protection until such time as that they can protect themselves or until Congress can regulate their title. And so this is pretty phenomenal. So it said not just Florida, not just the Carolinas, but every Negro is to be awarded 40 acres across the country. So we didn't even get that far with this order. This was overturned by Lincoln's successor, President Johnson, Andrew Johnson. He overturned this. He was not here for the free Negro. So we never even got into the 40 acres. There were some freedmen that moved rapidly. And so in the Carolinas, there are communities of American freedmen that have land. And that land was grabbed because they moved in a matter of days, literally. Afterwards, this order was sent out. They went and secured land, and they had to move that quickly because the order was overturned rapidly. So, to go back to the census, in the 1900s, in 1920, there were no changes. And in 1930, there was the addition of the Negro. This is very interesting, okay? So persons who were mixed white and Negro blood were to be counted as Negro. We had this 1-drop rule where essentially we used a visual thing that if you were not white passing, then you're going to be a Negro if you were mixed with white blood. People who were mixed white Indian were to be counted as Indian, as Native Americans, except where the percentage of Indian blood was very small or where he or she was regarded as white in the community. So there was a whitening of the Native American tribes that had occurred. If you were Native American and you appeared Black, you were counted as a Negro. You lost your Native American, you lost your sovereignty. Any person who was white and colored was to be counted in the colored race, and mixed colored races were to be counted according to the race of the father. This is also problematic because in indigenous communities, we identify our lineage by our mothers. So our government is not even acknowledging cultural heritage and how we recognize ourselves and our practices. This is part of systemic racism. Bell Hooks defines racism in its most simplest forms as the white supremacist, patriarchal, capitalistic system. I like to let people know you are not anti-racist unless you are anti-white supremacist. You are not anti-racist unless you are anti-patriarchal. You are not anti-racist unless you are anti-capitalist. And that last one really trips everybody up because we are all participating in a system of capitalism. We don't really have a choice. So, we have to decolonize our approach and really think more radically. But I'm getting ahead of myself now. So self-identification was fully in place by 1970 and later on. 1970 data item was still called color or race with the following response categories: white, Negro, or Black. Indian American, Japanese, Chinese, Filipino, Hawaiian, Korean, and other. And this was the first appearance of Black since 1920. So this is huge. As you can see, like Negro or Black, right, is just put in there. But if you can recognize the heritage of Chinese, Filipino, Hawaiian, Korean, all of these people, all of these heritage have Black within them. But we're not going to do that with these other tribes. We're actually going to recognize them by their heritage. It's only for Black indigenous here, for American freedmen, and for our Caribbean and our people of African descent that we're only recognized as Negroes and as Blacks. Let me see. So here I have a video I'm going to share with you guys. This is, let me just stop it. This is a video that I found like on TikTok. A lot of the youth are sharing, youth American freedmen are sharing data all the time on TikTok. I have very long days, I'm frequently exhausted, and to unwind, I found the American freedmen algorithm on TikTok. And so this stuff just pops up. So I'm gonna play this video. Hopefully you guys can hear it.
Not hearing it.
No.
Can we? I don't know.
Okay. Tribes. Am I good now?
You're good now.
Okay, thank you. How he actually attacked the Native American tribes for them to lose their sovereignty, no longer be recognized as Native American, and to become Negroes, to become Black. So there was the attack of Native Americans to become Negro Blacks, that way that they could systemically target us and continue to target us. So this sort of information is all over the place. It is, we're talking and educating each other in informal ways on TikTok. There are sources on like PBS, there's Harvard. I mean, all of this information is everywhere. I've added some sources and then just some fun ways for you to see, like in layman's terms, how we're like really talking about white supremacy and the history of it. And this white supremacist, he just died just a couple of decades ago. I believe in the 1990s, he passed away. And so this TikToker said when he died, the church said amen. And the headlines celebrated his death. And the harm that he held. So I just wanted to share that with you for you to see that it wasn't just the census and the tracking. We had white supremacy working in cahoots. And so there was a systemic approach from our government and then from our white communities as well, to our white supremacist communities across the country. We're also working in collusion with our government to whiten the Native Americans, to increase the Negro Black African population, and to increase discrimination as for partial is genocide and medical apartheid that has been occurring within this country. So I just want to go into what is reparations, because a lot of people think of reparations really as just a check and as the possibility of just defining everybody as just Black people. Reparations is not an affirmative action program. It is not something that can be overturned by the Supreme Court. Reparations is recognized by the United Nations. We have international law on our side. Precedent has been set. Cases have already been made. Reparations is being given out to multiple other tribes by the United States. And so we have some, I'm gonna read this here just for audio for people who are listening. According to the United Nations, reparations is the adequate, effective, and prompt reparation is intended to promote justice by redressing gross violations of international human rights law or serious violations of international humanitarian law. Reparations should be proportional to the gravity of the violations and the harm suffered in accordance to its domestic laws and international legal obligations. A state shall provide reparation to victims for acts or omissions which can be attributed to the state and constituent gross violations of international human rights laws or serious violations of international humanitarian law. In cases where a person, a legal person, or other entity is found liable for reparation to a victim, such parties should provide reparation to the victim or compensate the state if the state has already provided reparation to the victim. There are 5 steps that must be met according to the United Nations as part of reparations. 1 is secession assurances and guarantees of non-repetition. This can look like a formal apology from a municipality, a state, federal level being recognized, and them taking steps to assure that this behavior will not repeat again. 2 is restitution and reparation. So we want to give restitution where we can to those who have been directly harmed. 3 is compensation. And so frequently we need cash is part of it. Monetary is part of reparations because well, within transatlantic slave trade, we have not just theft of labor, but we have theft of intellectual property. And we also have theft of sovereignty and theft of body. African Americans, American freedmen have been used for medical experiments. We would not have blood plasma without Henrietta Lacks. It is not for anybody else to decide what is reparations for us when it comes to like medical apartheid. It could be something where we as a collective, as a tribe say, you know what, since without our blood, we would have no blood plasma. African Americans, American freedmen should never be denied blood transfusions. And so the medical system would have to adjust to recognize that those who are American freedmen, African American, should always have blood available to them from blood banks as necessary. Can you write that down and save it for me? Thank you. So that's just one way that is a possibility. We have satisfaction. So when we say, okay, this is what we're going to give as part of reparations, the people who have been directly harmed on an individual and collective manner can receive it and then assess, has it met satisfaction? Has it repaired the harm? And if not, what is it going to take? So this is a cycle. Don't think of it as one time. You're going to cut a check one time. No, reparations is a cycle. It's a continuous conversation. It's a relationship building. It is not a transaction. And then we have rehabilitation. So like with Grow to Consume, we're looking for this as it's a free public health program and really probably moving us to become a garden therapy program. So this is part of like, you know, rehabilitation is the things that we're talking about here. And then for cooperative, I'm going to have a video. Let me see. Actually, we are very behind on time and I need to get us into our imagination exercises for today. I have a 15-minute video. Jessica Gordon Nemhard is the writer of Collective Courage. It has the whole history of African-American cooperatives. I wanted to give you guys a video for people that, you know, my visual audio learners, something quick and easy. For those who prefer to read, there is a book available, Collective Courage. You can go and purchase this book and learn about the history of it. And this video, as you can see, it's available on YouTube. It is wonderful. And I do encourage you to listen to Jessica wherever you can. She's doing so much phenomenal work. The book, it's such a blueprint for me and for so many of us as African Americans, as American freedmen. Collective wealth is a cultural value for us. We are not here for for individual capitalism. This was propaganda that has come out of our government and has increased, I would say, since like the 1970s, 1980s, probably in response to the 1960s and the hippie uprising and the anti-war movement. So we had increased like fascism propaganda, and part of that is individual capitalism, which we see thriving, like literally thriving today, including within our African-American freedmen community. We need to counter this and have cultural education and center African-American cooperative history and re-educate our community on this, as well as other communities on our history, so that our values can be honored, and within us we can restore our values, because so many people do not even know of our history. Let me just. Okay, so here at MRCC, we're working with a couple of other organizations, and we have started for the past couple of years working on what we call the economic railroad. The economic railroad is to pick up underneath, it's been coined underneath that Underground Railroad. What we realized is that after the Civil War and the African Americans married, the Negro was set free. White people said, "Yeah, you're free. We're all set. We're all done. We can, go home. We can all live our lives. It's great here now." And the work stopped. The anti-racism movement stopped. And a lot of the conversations we have today is, I just don't understand. You're poor. I'm poor. What's the problem? We need to just address race by class issues. Race issues cannot be solved by class issues. These are two different issues, you guys, that do intersect, but race issues need to be addressed with race solutions. So here for the economic railroad, we have several objectives. One is land sovereignty and establishing community land trusts. American freedmen here in Massachusetts, we have 0 community land trusts owned by American freedmen. Not that there are not community land trusts owned by Black people, but again, Black is not a monolith. We're asking for American freedmen, African Americans, to be recognized as our tribe, so that, because we are also passing policy to be recognized as tribes. 2, a barter network and mutual aid. Right? This is a decolonization approach. We do not want cash to be the middleman in between our transactions. I have knowledge on this issue. You have a tractor. Can I exchange my knowledge for accessing the equipment? And we can call this a fair trade, as well as mutual aid. How are we distributing goods towards our communities? The third one is SUSU, Opportunity Bank for Growers Resource Library. 4th is land trauma, relationship and land relationship building, which I've gone into. The Growers Resource Library, we're actually going to be kicking off a fundraiser for that later on this year to get that going. 4 is climate justice, honoring land through ancestral practices. So if any land is donated over to this project, we are not going to use this land for traditional farming practices. We have our own ancestral practices, and part of this is climate justice. As colonizers came to land, you can look at Ford and how he treated Brazil and the history of it. Our colonizers came here and they literally burnt the land and raised it, and killed a lot of native plants and a lot of native animals. So harm has been done. And right now, when you say climate justice, you're essentially saying decolonize the land. So our indigenous people who have hundreds of years of experience on this land, should be centered in these conversations, we believe, and actually leading the conversation, for they have lineage expertise on land management here of Turtle Island. And then 6, for our practices to be regenerative and sustainable. So those are our goals. Our approach is to advocate for reparative justice policy on a municipal, state, and federal level, build community through relationship building. So if you're like, hey, I have 60 acres and I want to donate over 10, okay, that's great, thank you. Do you have any capacity to relationship build with American freedmen? Because your neighborhood, everybody around, oh no, 2 farms down, that person is a white supremacist. Do not take roads down that way. Go this way. Do not go right, go left when you enter and come off the highway. Things like that was normalized as part of the Underground Railroad. We need to pick this back up. My white community, I need for you to get into it with anti-racist practices as part of relationship building. Then public education of American freedmen, African Americans, their loss of sovereignty and reparations as recognized by international law and defined by United Nations. And then we have solidarity, repairing the harm. So offerings, pooling resources, again, community land trust, growers resource library, access to education. 2, building a value-based community, policy support. Where's our 40 acres? So at MRCC this year, we're launching our campaign, Where's Our 40 Acres, in collaboration with multiple organizations. And then 4, advocacy support. Storytelling to raise awareness and funds, which is a 40 Acres Writing Circle. And for those who are listening virtually, there is a forum with QR codes that have been uploaded. All of this information, you have access on there too. So now we're going to get into our imagination exercise. If you can take out the form, we're going to go through this, and questions, please drop them in the chat. And I know somebody here has a question now. We have 15 minutes. So this is the fun part. This is where we get to imagine. I do not believe we are thinking outside of the box more. I did not want to do a technical, exercise right here for us to be practical right now. I believe we need to take a step back and actually really think imaginative of how we want our world to look, and for us to put all of our brain power together to imagine what does a decolonized world look like. So we have some questions on here, and then for everybody else that have questions, please ask me your questions and I'm going to answer them now. You're all set? Okay, well, this is the time now. Does anybody else have questions?
Nothing in the chat.
Nothing in the chat.
How do we ensure that the colonization doesn't happen again? Like, as we make progress to gain sovereignty, the forces, the colonizers obviously still exist, and at any moment, really, it can sort of be like, screw you, we're so powerful, we can just sort of bulldoze you out of the way.
So I'm gonna put this question up for everybody to answer, not just myself. I'm gonna answer you. We'll answer this question, and I'll get to you. So
you said you were putting it to the room. That was why I raised my hand.
Okay, so the question is, how do we ensure colonizers don't take over the land? How do we ensure our indigenous tribes don't lose their sovereignty and their land, because colonization is still active? The United States of America is here. How do we ensure our white supremacists are not going to cause harm and we're going to take steps back? Before I answer, does anybody, this is an imagination exercise, what do you think are steps that we could take to ensure and protection?
This is less, like you said, to make sure the white supremacists don't take over, and those are individuals. So more about how to stop colonization from taking over is a large way that they pushed that was our ignorance. That, like with the Homestead Act, they told us that they were giving us empty acres out west, but those were native lands. Those were lands where these tribal people moved around and were nomadic. And they told our ancestors, oh, this land is free and empty and it's for you. And we weren't critical about that. And so a big part of like stopping colonization from taking it back is being critical of our own government. And when they say this is a good thing that we're doing, actually asking what about it is good and who does it affect and what are the things that we don't see, because they almost always aren't telling us someone's side of the story.
Thank you. I think that is perfect. And it's one of the things that we have in the economic railroad is public education. So we believe it's one of the strongest tools out there. There's too much revisionist history that has occurred and is still occurring. So please do not underestimate the power of education. I believe that's one way. 2 is just plain old good old fashioned action. Action through relationship building. Do you know your neighbors? How many of you guys actually know your neighbors? If you had a militia come through your neighborhood and they wanted to kill people of African descent, of our Native Americans, of our Hispanic, of our Asian, how many neighbors do you know? And what action are you ready to take on to protect your neighborhood? Where are you to stand your ground? This is very real work. The harm that is facing us is physical. It is not to be doubted. I think that if you are in a state of saying, oh no, it's not that serious, you are a person in denial, and your denial stems from privilege. You have not had to deal with the harms, and you are also extremely ignorant. You have revisionist history upholding this ideology. And so you need to be educated further so that you can understand the true harms that have already happened and continuously happening right now today, like actively today, there's harms happening today. So self-determination is a huge, it's a cultural value of American freedmen, African Americans, and we believe it is essential key to liberation. So actually acknowledging, oh, I actually have this skill set because I have privilege, and I see that your community has systemically been withheld from having access to this skill set. I'm not going to charge you. Right? I'm not going to charge you to have access to this information. It can include knowing how to bear arms. It could also know how to, knowing native plants here. Why do I need to be certified on native plants by an institution that was developed by, a white-led institution, white-founded institution, when I am native to this land? Why am I buying back my own culture, my own, ancestral practices? This is colonization, and it's entrapping us and keeping us in a state of debt. And now we're seeing that we never really resolved slavery here. We are now in a modern day debt system, which is part of like the history of sharecropping and slavery and everything here. Did you have another?
I was going to touch on community defense just as like bringing it back for folks who maybe aren't quite ready for gun training, but still like want to do community defense, especially in Massachusetts as our white allies. Like cop watching is really fucking important. Northampton, everyone says is a great liberal place. And if you look, it's almost entirely fucking white. And the reason that is because when we're not watching, they chase every POC out. But like I stopped, I was just walking down the street and some nice white girl rear-ended the person in front of her, and the guy, a working man behind her, made the turn and hit her because she was stopped. And the cop let everyone else go, and the working guy with dreads, who was like actually in like had paint on his hands, was in the middle of the job, got in trouble for it. And the cops, they would have arrested him if I had sat there with him, and he would have lost his job. And so if you're in an area that is mostly white, and you think that like it's a nice liberal fucking area, it is probably because the system is chasing everyone else out, and it is our job to like make sure they're not fucking doing it. So if you're not ready to hold the gun yet,
Thank you.
We have a couple questions in the chat.
Oh, we do. Can you read them to me?
Yeah, someone wanted to know about NISOG and the 21-day challenge.
Okay, so I know that NISOG is presenting in another room, and they have the 21-day racial healing challenge. And so that question should go towards them because it's not for me. But what you can do with that 21-day challenge is ask yourself, how are you repairing harm towards African Americans, American freedmen? Can you for 21 days join Where's Our 40 Acres? movement. How can you support that? There's a QR code with a form that goes to a Google form where you can sign up, and we meet virtually as a community to build to build solidarity as a community. There's policy movement on a municipal level that's occurring. So I actually am a policy writer. I write policies on this and helping us on a municipal level to push policies that can support a state bill. So that's, one way that you can do it. You can also go and talk to neighbors. And really, from my white communities, I ask you to relationship build. I know you know your neighbors. I know you know who to borrow sugar from, and really tapping into difficult conversations. The 21 days of racial healing can also look like joining an anti-racist group. If you contact us at MRCC, I have a network of anti-racist groups that you can join, and you can learn privately. If you're saying, hey, I actually need more support, I don't know this, I don't want to say something that's going to be offensive, I'm just not equipped yet. There's community, there's support for you to help you with those areas. I do want to ask you guys a question that's on this imagination exercise. Do we have? Yes, we still have 6 minutes. Okay. So there are many roles in the future of repair. This is the second question. There are many roles in the future of repair, in the revolution, the future of repair. There's the advocate, the comrade, the builder, the educator, the caretaker. How do you envision each of these roles being able to repair harm from colonialism? And what roles do you see missing? A lot of people underestimate the caretaker. Yes.
I want to just start by.
Yes. So yes, I do. So for people who are virtual, the question is just that reparations is a lot, and they are from South Africa. They have seen a lot. They just came back, and they feel overwhelmed and frequently defeated. And what are action items? Because healing is a lot of work. What are action items that we can actually do? And how can we prevent within the Black community actually upholding colonialism and upholding harm to one another? Because as you acquire land, you become privileged, and then you can discriminate against each other. And as human beings, we have a tendency to otherize each other anyways. This can be seen, they said, from South Africa, from the LGBTQ movement that's occurring there, and how that is actually, people are being harmed as well there too. And then people of Zimbabwean or Nigerian descent being killed, unalived. And so one, I will let you know that if you go to www.harvardblackhealthmatters.org, there's a conference next month, February 17th and 18th, I believe it is. There's a 2-day conference. There are multiple workshops and conversations occurring throughout those 2 days. Action, be in the room, come and attend, be around healers. The theme is to decolonize health. So that's one. And two, I think part of healing is us decolonizing health. We cannot approach healing from colonization through a colonized lens. The mental health system within the United States is one that was bred as an alternative to prisons. Literally, women would be locked up for being too difficult. And that was simply because they were asking questions and were resisting the patriarchy. There's so much medical apartheid within this country, and how the mental health system in the United States, since COVID, we've learned that our oxygen machines cannot read the oxygen levels of people of African descent. So literally, we have inventions that we have to develop because the machines that are being developed center people of European descent. And then it just says they say it works for everybody. They're not acknowledging genetics and epigenetics. So we have to really stop this all lives matter, and acknowledge how much harm it is actively occurring within our healthcare systems. And then I believe as part of reparations and as part of repairing the harm is tribal acknowledgement. And this is part of the celebration. I believe healing, and I'm working with another reparative justice advocate, is celebrating one another. I want to come to your, South African events. I want to learn more about your culture. I want to be able to celebrate all of you and your ancestors. And I want to be celebrated in return. I do not believe healing can exist without joy. I believe that when we strip joy out of healing, that is colonization. I believe that joy for us comes a lot in movement, a lot of dancing, right? We see in the United States, the life expectancy is actually dropping. Previous to like current generations, African Americans, American freemen, we lived into our hundreds. We're now dying today, like our 50s and 60s. You're lucky if you live to your 70s and 80s. This is not just towards us, this is everybody, because our food systems, which you guys are here today, is trash and what we're being fed. So this is systemic, and this is part of medical apartheid, and this is part of systemic racism. But I believe a lot of the healing we need to go is to acknowledge the harm that we do with one another, and then have very difficult conversations on how to repair that harm. It requires being specific. I need to, in the moment, name the harm and name how I've actually, on an interpersonal level, have harmed you, and vice versa. And then we need to sit back and being able to name what is it going to take to repair our relationship with one another. You guys, if you don't know, South Africa, the apartheid that existed there, we have white supremacy think tanks. There are several of them. Massachusetts was one of the places that they studied to build apartheid in South Africa. Racism is so successful in Massachusetts that they're able to go and use it to build apartheid and colonization in other countries. Reparative justice is healing justice. They coexist together. At MRCC, we're saying we're in solidarity for reparative, healing, and racial justice. It's all together. You cannot have reparative justice and understanding decolonization without acknowledging that reparative is actually healing and racial justice. So it's all three forms of justice is part of reparative. And so we also, shoot, I forgot my thought. I think that, economic railroad, building a values-based economy, a values-based community. Right. So I want to start having conversations, and I want to know, what are your values? I want to be able to share my values, and then being able to build relationships based upon values. This is decolonization, right? Let's go have a cup of tea, cup of coffee, let's go for a walk, and just sit down and talk with one another and identify each other's values. Let's recognize hoarding. Let's recognize the spirit of hoarding. Let's recognize that in the United States that we put our best hoarders on the covers of magazines. The more of a successful hoarder you are, you'll get a TV show recognizing you as a hoarder, and then people get to look down at you. Look at that person, they got trash in their house. They got bags of poop around there, right? But then if you hoard cash, ooh, I want to be like you. This is celebrated. So different types of hoarding. Right? We are a culture of hoarders. Culture of hoarders. This is part of colonization. We have normalized hoarding. We have to recognize the spirit of hoarding. And so if we're not able to recognize, I'm scared to share. No, because I want power over you. I want dominion over you. That is how I'm going to be able to hold on to everything I have and accumulate more. Do we want that, or do I want the power to? Do I want the power to see you as a whole person? Do I want the power to share all of my resources with you? Do I want the power to, assist you and end of life services and being present as a loving human being, and being able to be present there with you, because our healthcare systems is a failure for our elderly. Never mind everybody else is a failure far as I'm concerned, period. And so we need to really acknowledge values. American Freeman, we value our elders. They've gone through so much on this land. How are we actually centering and prioritizing our elders? How are we restoring chiefs within our communities? Our community organizers, if they're dealing with homelessness and they're our chiefs of our communities and they're dealing with instability, how are they actually able to service their community without losing themselves, losing their minds, losing their families? How are we stabilizing this community by prioritizing the chiefs within our community? These are some of the things, building a values-based community and talking to one another about values so that culturally we're educating each other. And I believe that's how it actually happens. Is I do a lot more teas and coffees than I do meetings. It's very hard for me to do an impact report because I'm just like, do you know where do I put tea talks? How are tea talks calculated in an impact report, right? This is insanity to me, but I have to practice transparency. And so I do relationship building with all of our people. MRCC is a publicly funded organization. We raise funds, our members know, and I let them know what we're doing, how much matter, and we want to implement a budget participatory process where our members actually can say, okay, this is the campaign, these are the things that objectives, where should we be prioritizing funds to go towards things. We want more member participation at MRCC. Actually, it's one of the hardest things that we struggle with. So I think we're over time now, and I deeply apologize. If there's anything else that you have to share with me, I am here. Okay, awesome. Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna let you resolve that.
Yep.
Okay. So I think that, comrades, we need to really recognize comrades through a lens of climate justice. We're look at California, look at how there's flooding going on, right? When you have communities that are marginalized, majority are Black, Brown, Indigenous, and they are going to experience, and please excuse me, I'm just doing some hip stretches right now as I stand. They're going to experience extreme flooding. You look at our housing crisis right now. What the F is going to happen when we are flooded on this coastline? Comrades, now's the time. Show up. We have to prep the land. This is why part of the economic railroad is to decolonize the land. We are getting ready. We have a mantra within our community. Stay ready so you don't have to get ready, okay? So we need to start prepping the land yesterday, okay? Because we are going to have flooding all across our coastline here. Boston, underwater. Where are these people gonna go? I think we need to think more radically about our future, and I think we need to imagine developing sister towns. Boston needs to have a sister town. Cambridge needs to have a sister town. Martha's Vineyard, all of these towns need to have a sister town in Central and Western Massachusetts. We need a relationship built, and the communities there that are most marginalized actually have a secondary home within Central and Western Massachusetts. We're not going to scramble to find you housing because we have community land trusts and the housing is there and the food system's already prepped. And you guys have been living and prepping and getting ready to know that your land is potentially going to be wiped out within the next 10 years, maybe 20, but it's going down. And can happen a lot, right? It can happen this year, next year, we could start to experience this. And so if you look, I know like Revere one year was flooded, houses were flooded, there was ice water, cars were floating with ice water. So this is already happening on our coast. Downtown Boston was flooded. A couple of years ago, they were flooded as well too. So we comrades, prepping, emergency prep. That's the role of the comrade is acknowledging the very real danger that we are in and directly assisting to address that. We still have more time. Thank you. I want to hear from you guys, though. I don't want to be the only one talking here. This is meant to be interactive. So I do want to hear from you guys before I go to another question. How do you envision these roles? And then what roles do you see missing?
I'd maybe break some of these up. Like I think there's like a protector one for comrade and a like offensive one for comrade. There's a difference between resisting something, saying like this, like defending like land and being like, well, this is a beautiful spot and we're not going to let anything happen here. So we put our bodies and our things in the way to stop that from happening. As opposed to the comrades who are like, ACAB, quit killing black people, we're going to go burn down precincts. That those, like, there's an offense and defense comrade, there's a protector and a like. And I also think that like caretaker can also be split similarly, that there's a protector caretaker that you ideally don't see, that if everything is going great, that they're just taking care of the spot and making sure that the stuff is still growing, the trees are pruned, the plants are things. And then there's the caretaker who like goes and sees to the people and things that are damaged, that are like about restoring it, as opposed to just like maintaining. So I'm not sure we need more roles as much as maybe just like
Defining them
separate or
further.
define.
I love that. I have a friend that's a death doula and assists people to preparing for ancestorhood. So I'd like you to think of where would a death doula fit in these roles within the caretaker role? Where would a death doula fit within there? But I love the comrade of splitting it out. I know comrade, this term is really like politicized, and to really simplify it as the role of the protector and the role of the defender. I constantly try to think of words that don't agitate, but actually can get to the source, that we can be in agreement versus a place of resistance, because we already have so much resistance to healing and to working with one another. You want me to talk about the builder role?
Yeah.
So when I think of the role of the builder, I think of this role as one that's physical. So physically, like decolonizing the land, right? Working the land, that's the role of a builder. Housing, literally building houses through a decolonized lens. So that is a role of a builder. I think a builder is also a community organizer. Community organizers building community. I think of that being a builder. Many of my friends are community organizers. They're really builders. They're building a whole new world that is different than the world that we currently exist in, or at least we're trying to. So I think of that as the role of the builder. I think the role of the builder can exist in different forms. It's in its physical, and then it's in its spiritual and personal. And then because you're a builder within yourself, how are you building up yourself? How are you demonstrating self-love towards yourself? Remember, everybody, colonization, racism, it harms all of us, regardless of race. There's only one race, it is the human race. And out of the human race, we are a tribe of many. So, building up a world where we recognize there's only one race, and it is the human race. That requires building up of oneself, educating oneself is that role as well too. And then, our spiritual guides are also builders, building up ourselves spiritually, connecting ourselves with our ancestral practices, and holding those up, honoring our ancestors. There are many, many different ways, I believe, of being a builder. Does anybody have anything they would love to share on ways they see a role of a builder? Can you speak up? I'm sorry.
Yeah, building your resilience of your health, like building up that foundation,
Mhm.
build a community of lives, build their
Mhm. Yes. I love that, gut health. So building up gut health. Our immune system is protected by our gut. So when our gut is destroyed, it's connected with our mind, with our whole body. So prioritizing gut health and keeping people strong and building up strong people through approach of gut health. This is a very decolonized approach that you stated. It is one that there's been papers written from Harvard, and I'm going to be speaking next month, and it is one of the things that I'm advocating for food to be recognized as medicine, organic food to be recognized as medicine, and I believe our healthcare system has to lock arms in regards to that. So I'm working with CAHA, Cambridge Health Alliance, for them to lock arms with our local growers here. I want to see our hospitals have whole food, plant-based diets. I believe you guys as local farmers should be able to have contracts with the hospitals, and so that we are having options to, and you're getting, that's a contract for you guys as local growers. And then also as patients within the system, we're not being fed this crap here in Massachusetts, but we're actually getting live produce, and we have on the menu an option of whole food, plant-based diets. Within Cambridge, we passed a policy for racial justice and equity commission. We have 13 areas on that policy. One of the areas we split out is public health, mental health, and medicine. So medicine is to be decolonized. We want to discuss how there is medicine has been defined by Western medicine, and that we have to have integrative medicine, which is food-based medicine, and that when we do not acknowledge plant medicine, we are upholding systemic racism. So that we need to come through this approach here to decolonize our hospitals in the way they are approaching health for people. It is not a one size fits all. We need to diversify the way hospitals are offering treatment towards people, because we know they don't heal anything, they just treat. So yes, I agree. I totally agree with you. We still have a few minutes. Did anybody, 2 minutes? I might go into another question, but if there's more thoughts, do we have more thoughts?
Something maybe the advocate, like most of these we are building it, but their systems existing before. How come every time we have this problem to be at time, acknowledging that solutions might already exist within our people, and just acknowledging international system, indigenous medicine, it doesn't work until it is tested in the lab. As long as indigenous people are using it, what role, I mean, today we're talking about solidarity, their values, indigenous people for many years. That's the economy that we're using. That area will continue. Colonization is coming. What role can that be where we really humble ourselves every time climate change is happening? Some wisdom somewhere about how to deal with climate change. What role is that where we can do it?
What role is which one?
Could we pull that? That's why I say I don't know whether it's advocate or
the educator.
Why educating and educate, but there's some wisdom, ability to
The educator,
apply this wisdom.
yes, the wisdom that you're talking about is one that is indigenous, it is ancient, it needs to be recognized. And we need to centralize indigenous voices when we're talking about decolonization. And that's why I said the educator. The advocate is in arms with the educator, right? So I didn't write the books, but I'm advocating and I am boosting awareness of, but I need to centralize the voice of and uplift so that this information does not become whitewashed, it does not become revisionist history, so that the power can transfer from those who have traditionally held it and to those whose power has been ripped away from them. So I know this government is going to be putting trillions of dollars towards climate justice. Why is that money not being centralized towards our Native Americans? They already had the land prepped for climate change, right? So that would make like a no-brainer, but until we as advocates are not moving and shifting ourselves and saying, you know what, this climate change justice conference is not being led by Native Americans, to advocate for it to be led by Native Americans, to build relationships with our Native Americans, centralize their voices, and hold resistance that no, we're not going to be paying you unless that money is going back into Native American tribes, and for them to have land back in whatever asset they are asking for, as well as American freedmen, then this is not going to, the systems are not going to change. I think we have like maybe 1 minute. No,
Well, you got the
Okay.
bonus, we got the bonus time. We're gonna do one more.
one more
question. I
minute,
mean,
one more.
I was gonna say, I think we have to have the awareness that the government and these people, they may say like, oh, we want to solve climate change, but they've never made more money than at the peak of climate change. They may say we want to solve, you know, the malnutrition, but they've never made more money by selling like nutrient-dense milk.
Mhm.
So I think like to take these organizations, these white supremacists, to take what they're saying as the truth is it's not a great starting point.
It's not a great starting
We
point.
should just like assume that they're lying to us. Just like
I
they're
like
just,
that. Yeah. I think it's good to assume that not all white supremacists want to be saved. I
yeah.
believe that you have to understand you could bring the horse to the water, but you cannot make the horse drink the water. Consent, 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 consent. Part of decolonization is consent. Consent every single step of the way. If they are saying resistance, you do not have consent. I am not at a point where I have to acknowledge where this is going to be a battle, or I can step away and build. Which way, which direction am I going to go? Do I have enough comrades? Do I have enough allies? Am I now ready to fight? No, I need to go back. I need to build. So you need to really think strategically amongst this. I think our time is up. I apologize.